Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. This particular lecture is about operant conditioning, as you could probably tell by the title. Specifically, reinforcement and punishment and how to tell apart the different types of each. Now, this may seem to be fairly obvious, but I can tell you right now there's a very good chance that what you think is true about both reinforcement and punishment are not. Okay? Is not. So basically, I'm going to go through and break these down like I like to do, talk about the different types, and let you know how you can tell them apart. Now, on the surface, yes, if you're looking at reinforcement and punishment just sitting by itself, they're fairly easy to tell apart. But each has two types, depending on exactly how you're going about that particular process. Now, reinforcement is anything that increases the probability that a behavior will reoccur. Anything that makes a behavior more likely to reoccur. Now, what you need to keep in mind is that psychologists use the word reinforcer for a reason. We don't like to use the term reward. Reward is a type of reinforcer, but it's not the whole thing. The other thing you need to realize is, like beauty, reinforcement and punishment both are in the eye of the beholder. That what might be reinforcing for one person will probably not be reinforcing for another, and we'll get into that more a little bit later. But the way to look at it then is reinforcement is anything that increases the likelihood of a behavior occurring. Now, there's two ways that you can increase the likelihood of a behavior occurring. The first is called positive reinforcement, which you've probably heard of. Positive reinforcement is when a behavior is followed by something good, by something pleasant, by something the individual likes or wants. And indeed, if you do a behavior and something good happens, something that makes you happy happens, or something that you get what you want when you do a behavior, you're going to be more likely to do that behavior in the future. That's positive reinforcement. Now, the one that's tricky is negative reinforcement, because negative reinforcement is not the opposite of positive reinforcement. I see people say, well, negative reinforcement is when you punish something. No. Reinforcement, by definition, makes the behavior more likely to occur. The positive and the negative are simply looking at the different ways to do it. Negative reinforcement is when, after a behavior, something bad is taken away. Something bad is taken away. Or you avoid the bad thing altogether because you do this particular behavior. That also is going to make the behavior more likely to occur. I have a cat. When my cat is hungry, he stares at me, and stares at me, and stares at me, and he only stops staring at me when I feed him. Which means in the future, when he wants to eat, he's going to be more likely to stare at me. Okay? That's that, and I'm going to be more likely to feed him. So we have both positive and negative reinforcement going on. He says staring leads to food, that's good, and I say feeding leads to no more staring. You take away something bad. The idea, for instance, behind nagging is you nag at someone, you need to wash the dishes, you need to wash the dishes, you need to wash the dishes, you need to wash the dishes. As soon as they wash the dishes, you shut up. Hopefully in the future they will be more likely to do the dishes to avoid your nagging altogether, although quite frankly it doesn't always work that way. This is not a perfect science. The positive and the negative here are not value judgments. Positive is not good, negative is not bad. They're not opposites. They're just different ways of getting to the same goal, essentially. Giving something good is positive reinforcement. Taking away something bad is negative reinforcement. Both make a behavior more likely to occur. Unlike punishment, punishment by definition makes a behavior less likely to occur, at least in theory. Again, this isn't an exact science, and what has been found very often is punishment does not necessarily stop a behavior from occurring entirely. As an example, for those of you who drive, the odds are at some point or another you might have gotten a speeding ticket because you got caught breaking the rules, and the punisher was you got a ticket and you lost money. And of course, one would think then, because you were punished by breaking the speed limit, that you would therefore never break the speed limit again. But I suspect if you look at how you actually drive, you would find that you do indeed still break the speed limit. It's just that you're more careful about it. You're careful about when and where and around who you break the speed limit. So punishment doesn't necessarily actually remove behavior. It simply suppresses it. My parents have dogs that are technically not allowed up on the furniture. And the dogs have learned that if they are caught on the furniture, then my parents will yell at them, and they find that rather punishing. They don't like being yelled at. So does that mean that the dogs no longer get on the furniture? Of course not. What it means is that when my parents leave the house, for instance, the dogs jump up on the couch. And as soon as they hear the car coming in the driveway, they get off the couch. And since my parents do not catch them on the couch, they cannot be punished. And we know they do this because you can go to the couch and there is a big, hairy, warm spot where the dog has been laying. Okay? And so punishment does not always do what you want it to. But the idea is that punishment makes the behavior like... By the way to get a behavior that you want, or rather to stop a behavior you don't want, is to reinforce its opposite. If your dog jumps on you, don't punish them for jumping on you. Reinforce them for not jumping on you. Reinforce the dog for not being on the couch. Reinforce... We should be rewarded for doing the speed limit instead of punished for not doing it. That would probably be more effective. But I digress. Anyway, punishment makes a behavior less likely to occur. Now, there's two ways to do punishment. And these might look familiar. The first is called positive punishment. Positive punishment is when, after a behavior, you are given something bad. Something bad happens. You get a ticket, you get yelled at, whatever. Now, this is also known as punishment by application, because you're applying something that causes the behavior to be less likely to occur. Although, personally, I prefer positive punishment, because it's logical, it makes sense, and it follows the pattern. I'm a big fan of patterns. So this is you get yelled at, you get a spanking, you get a fine, you get a ticket, whatever. Now we can also have what's called negative punishment, not surprisingly. Negative punishment is when a behavior is reduced, at least in theory, by taking away something good, by taking away something pleasant. That's negative punishment. Now, this is called punishment by removal, because you're removing something good. Now, punishment has gotten a bad reputation over the past decades, and it's at least partly earned. Because, as I said, punishment not only does not always get rid of a behavior, but it can also cause other rather bad things, like aggression and a suppression of behavior entirely, and passive aggressiveness, and all sorts of nastiness can come from punishment. So, since people thought, well, that came from positive punishment, we're going to try negative punishment for a while, and they have been. A great example of negative punishment is a timeout. Now, when timeouts are done properly, they're very effective. The problem is most people don't do them properly. Because to be a proper timeout, you need to take the child and take them away from everything that they find pleasant, and keep them away from that good stuff for a while. So, for instance, when I was young, occasionally you would be told to go sit in the corner. Now, sitting in the corner was not particularly fun. You're away from your friends. There was nothing to do. And also, by the way, sitting in the corner is only really effective if you sit the child in the corner facing away from their classmates. Because otherwise, they can, make faces or make people laugh, and that's also reinforcing. So I've heard of people being told to go stand in the corner, put your nose in the corner, which is really boring. And that's the point. Unfortunately, most parents' idea of a timeout is, we're going to plop you on the couch for a second until you leave the couch and then go do whatever you want. That's not a timeout. That's not a timeout at all. To be a good timeout, you have to be persistent. You have to keep removing. And it was thought, well, timeouts, because there's no positive punishment here, will be less traumatic. The problem is that recent research has found that even negative punishment can cause problems. That children who are given timeouts very often come to think that their parents don't love them unless they behave properly, which is not really what we want kids to think. Because, of course, the kid thinks, well, if I misbehave, I get put in the corner, and mommy or daddy or both don't talk to me, and they make me stay there, and then they make me apologize and whatever. And there's some evidence that that can also cause ill effects. So, yeah. Now, this is not to say that I'm one of those people that say you should never use punishment. Punishment is bad in all circumstances, because it's not. If you think about it, the word no is a punishment. And I certainly would not want to be one of those people that say you can't say no. So, the best thing that you would want to do, though, instead, is to reinforce the behaviors that you want. Either positive or negative reinforcement, both work. and then maybe just a little bit of punishment to let the child know exactly what it is that you don't like that they are doing. Child, animal, or adult for that matter. So we have reinforcement, we have punishment, we have positive and negative for both. Please, 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 the hardest thing to remember here is that negative reinforcement is not the same as punishment, because you've probably been hearing that. I mean, I've heard it from everybody up to and including Oprah, and that is not correct. Negative reinforcement is not punishment. Negative punishment is not reinforcement. They're both named exactly what they are. Which brings me to, the odds are on a test you're going to be asked, I know in my tests you're going to be asked, given a situation, and say, what is this in terms of operant conditioning? And so I'm going to give you a lovely two-step process to figure that out. And the nice thing is this two-step process can also be used for other things. It can be used in classical conditioning in terms of stimulus, response, conditioned, unconditioned. It can also be used in schedules of reinforcement. But it's just a simple two-step process. The first step is determine whether or not you have reinforcement or punishment going on. And the way to do this, as I mentioned before, since reinforcement and punishment are in the eye of the beholder, is not to say to yourself, ooh, I would like that, that must be reinforcement, or ooh, that would suck, that must be punishment. Because what you like, I might think would suck, and vice versa. The way to figure out whether something is a reinforcer or a punisher is to look at the consequences. If it makes the behavior more likely to occur, it's reinforcement. If it makes it less likely to occur, it's punishment. The question should tell you this. If it doesn't, you should ask. Okay? But it should be clear what the consequences of the behavior are. So like I said, don't just look at what you think it would be. A lot of parents punish their children thinking that it's going to cause their children to stop acting up. But in fact, the children are acting up because they want attention. And at least punishment gives them attention, and any attention is better than none. So in fact, the punishment in that case, the parent thinks it's punishment, the child thinks it's reinforcement. Always look at the consequences. More likely to occur reinforcement, less likely to occur punishment. As for the second step, remember that positive and negative are not value judgments. Positive is not good, negative is not bad. Negative is not the opposite of punishment in terms of, it's not a value judgment, okay? The way I use it is simple. If something is given, it's positive. Whether you give something good or give something bad, it's still positive. You give something good, it's positive reinforcement. You give something bad, it's positive punishment. If something is taken away, it's negative. You take away something bad, it's negative reinforcement. You take away something good, it's negative punishment. Okay? Always look and do these two steps when you're trying to figure out whether some particular consequence is reinforcement or punishment, and what kind of reinforcement or punishment it is.